A stern, authoritative voice. "Sir, I am not going to debate this further. You will move to another seat as directed by my crew, or I will be forced to take further action." Another voice, calm, steady, cutting through the tension. "For clarity, Captain, are you stating that if I do not relinquish my assigned seat, 2A, which I have paid for and confirmed, you will take further action against me?" The low hum of the private car was a familiar sound to Augustus Thorne, a subtle vibration that usually lulled the background noise of his thoughts. Today, however, the hum seemed insufficient. His gaze drifted past the tinted window, tracing the blur of city lights streaking by. Another city, another conference. This one, the Global Ethics in Technology Summit, felt different. He was the keynote speaker, set to talk about the very soul of the algorithms shaping their world, bias fairness, the digital reflection of humanity's best and worst instincts. The irony wasn't lost on him, a quiet, persistent echo against the smooth leather of the seat. He adjusted the cuff of his impeccably tailored suit, his fingers brushing against the worn silver locket he always wore beneath his shirt. A nervous habit, perhaps a subconscious tether to a time before the billions. Before right tech solutions became a titan, before the world expected Augustus Thorne to have all the answers. Inside the locket rested a tiny, faded photograph. A smiling face, he rarely allowed himself to dwell on a reminder of a different kind of loss, one no algorithm could predict or prevent. That loss had carved something deep within him, a quiet vigilance against unfairness, a need for control in a world that often felt chaotic. The car slid to a stop before the gleaming chrome and glass facade of Skylux Airlines' private terminal, Skylux. The name itself dripped luxury exclusivity. Their marketing promised travel not just as a means to an end, but as an experience, a journey among the stars. Their tagline proclaimed, often accompanied by images of impossibly serene passengers floating through opulent cabins. Augustus had chosen them for the long haul to Geneva for precisely that reason. The promise of uninterrupted quiet, the space to refine his keynote, the legroom that was less a luxury and more a necessity for his 6'3" frame. Inside the Skylux first-class lounge was an exercise in minimalist opulence. Cool marble floors, strategically placed modern art, hushed tones. Yet beneath the polish, there was an almost clinical coldness. He noticed the slight fraying on the edge of a velvet rope, the flickering screen of a departure board momentarily glitching, small tells of an empire, perhaps, stretching its resources thin. An automated advertisement played silently on a large screen nearby, showcasing the airline's latest seating pods with slow-motion shots of actors beaming blissfully Skylux. The text overlay read, "Where every passenger reigns supreme." Augustus allowed himself a small internal sigh. If only reality were edited as smoothly as marketing campaigns. His check-in was seamless, efficient, impersonal. As he headed towards the priority boarding gate, a minor commotion caught his attention. A woman dripping in designer labels and radiating impatience, Seraphina Croft, he'd later learn her name, was arguing with a ground staff member, her voice a sharp, insistent blade cutting through the lounge's curated calm. "I always have my specific brand of sparkling water pre-chilled," she declared, tapping an aggressively manicured finger on the counter. "It's in my profile. Why is this so difficult?" The young staff member looked flustered, apologizing profusely. Augustus noted the exchange with a familiar weariness, the casual assertion of privilege, the expectation that the world should bend to accommodate a whim. He didn't linger, continuing towards his gate. Boarding was swift. He found his seat, 2A, Nestled in the curve of the fuselage near the front of the first-class cabin, it offered the promised space and a degree of privacy. He settled in, pulling out his tablet, ready to immerse himself in the final points of his speech. The gentle cabin lighting and the soft murmur of other passengers settling in created a temporary cocoon of calm. A flight attendant approached her smile. Bright practiced Cassidy Bell, according to her name tag, young professional, but with a flicker of something less certain in her eyes. Nervousness, pressure. Mr. Thorne, she confirmed, her voice. Pleasant. Welcome aboard, Skylux. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff? Perhaps some champagne. Just water for now. Thank you, Cassidy, Augustus replied, offering a polite smile. He appreciated the courtesy, but preferred to keep interactions minimal before a flight. He needed to focus. Cassidy nodded efficiently, procuring a bottle of water and a chilled glass. As she placed it down, her gaze seemed to linger for a fraction of a second, a quick, almost imperceptible assessment before retreating back into professional warmth. Please let me know if there's anything at all you need during the flight. He returned to his tablet, the world outside the plane already starting to feel distant. He had work to do, a message to deliver. He was vaguely aware of Skylux's current precarious position, whispers in the financial world about outdated booking systems, slipping customer satisfaction scores hidden beneath the veneer of luxury, and their desperate need for a technological overhaul. A partnership with a company like Right Tech Solutions was rumored to be their lifeline. The irony continued to stack up. Here he was, the potential savior, just another passenger settling into seat 2A, unaware that his meticulously planned flight was about to deviate sharply from its intended course, steered not by technology, but by the oldest, most stubborn flaws in the human code. The quiet hum of the engines spooling up outside promised a smooth journey. Inside, however, turbulence was already beginning to form. The quietude Augustus had sought was short-lived. A figure stopped beside his seat, casting a slender shadow over his tablet screen. He looked up into the coolly appraising eyes of the woman he'd seen earlier at the check-in counter, Serafina Croft. She surveyed seat 2A, then Augustus, with an air of faint surprise, as if discovering an unexpected piece of furniture in her private drawing room. "Excuse me," she began, her voice smooth, but carrying an undeniable edge of command. "I believe you're in my seat." Augustus lowered his tablet slowly. "I'm sorry, I think there must be a mistake. My boarding pass assigns me to 2A. Serafina offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a meticulously crafted expression of polite disbelief. "That's unlikely. You see, this is always my seat on the Geneva route. The airline knows this. It's practically reserved for me." She gestured vaguely, as if expecting him to simply evaporate. Augustus felt a familiar prickle of weariness beneath his calm exterior. He'd encountered variations of this certainty before, the assumption that established patterns, especially those enjoyed by the privileged, constituted unwritten law. She talks about this seat, he thought with a flicker of dry amusement, as if it's a family heirloom, passed down through generations of frequent flyers. He kept his voice even. Perhaps there was a glitch in the system. "Regardless, this is the seat assigned to me for this flight." He held up his boarding pass, the seat number clearly visible. Serafina's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, that's inconvenient." She didn't address his boarding pass directly, instead looking around pointedly, as if seeking intervention. Cassidy Bell, the flight attendant from earlier, reappeared almost instantly, drawn by the shift in atmosphere. Her professional smile seemed a little strained now, her eyes darting between Augustus and Serafina. "Is there a problem?" Ms. Croft Cassidy asked her, tone deferential towards the woman Augustus now recognized as a regular. "Yes, Cassidy," Serafina replied, turning her full attention to the attendant, effectively dismissing Augustus. "This gentleman seems to be confused about his seating assignment. 2A is my preferred seat, as you know." Cassidy's gaze flickered towards Augustus, a mixture of apology and pressure in her expression. "Sir," she began, lowering her voice slightly. "Miss Croft is one of our most valued Platinum Elite members, and she does usually occupy this particular seat." The implication hung heavy in the air. His status, whatever it was secondary to established preference. "I understand she prefers it," Augustus stated calmly, refusing to be drawn into an argument, but holding his ground. He reached into his wallet and retrieved his own Platinum Elite card, placing it gently on the armrest beside his boarding pass. "However, I am also a Platinum member, and this is my assigned seat for today's journey. I specifically selected it when booking." Cassidy visibly hesitated. The sight of his card clearly complicated the narrative she'd been prepared to enforce. She glanced nervously back towards the galley, caught between airline policy and the demands of a high-maintenance regular. I see, sir. Perhaps I could find you another comfortable seat in first class," she offered, though her tone lacked conviction. Before Augustus could respond, another figure emerged from the front galley, a tall man with a stiff posture and an air of unshakable self-importance. His uniform identified him as Alistair Finch, the cabin supervisor. He approached with a practiced smile that seemed fixed in place, assessing the situation with a quick, sweeping glance. "Everything all right here?" Alistair asked, his voice smooth, addressing Serafina. "First, Alistair, darling." Serafina sighed dramatically, placing a hand on his arm. "There seems to be a slight mix-up. This gentleman is in my seat." Alistair turned his attention to Augustus, his smile remaining, but his eyes conveying a subtle shift, from solicitous concern for Serafina to polite condescension towards Augustus. He took in Augustus's suit, his tablet, his calm demeanor, yet somehow seemed to register something out of place. Sir Alistair began, his tone excessively patient, as if explaining something simple to a child. "I understand there might be some confusion. On Skylux, we pride ourselves on accommodating our loyal patrons. Ms. Croft has a long-standing preference for this particular suite." He didn't acknowledge Augustus's platinum card, still resting on the armrest. "Perhaps you're unfamiliar with some of the unwritten courtesies extended to our most frequent flyers." The veiled insinuation that Augustus was somehow ignorant of how things really worked in this exclusive world was not lost on him. Nor was it lost on some of the other passengers. Augustus noticed a man across the aisle discreetly lower his newspaper, his eyes observing the interaction over the top edge. A businesswoman, 2 rows ahead, paused her, typing, her head tilted slightly. The bystander effect was kicking in. Curiosity mingled with discomfort, but no one spoke up. Not yet. "There's no confusion, Mr. Finch." Augustus replied, his voice quiet but firm, meeting Alistair's gaze directly. "I have a confirmed booking for this specific seat. 2A, I've presented my boarding pass and my platinum card. I appreciate Ms. Croft's preference, but it doesn't supersede a confirmed assignment." Alistair's smile faltered for a split second, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He clearly wasn't accustomed to polite, direct refusal, especially not from someone he had mentally categorized as being out of their depth. He straightened his tie, a small dismissive gesture. "Well," Alistair said, his tone shifting, losing some of its forced pleasantry. "We'll have to see what can be done." He exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Serafina, a silent promise to resolve the inconvenience. He then turned abruptly, heading back towards the front galley, leaving Cassidy hovering uncertainly, and Serafina standing beside the seat, radiating smug certainty. The air in the cabin thickened. The low hum of the aircraft seemed louder now, filling a space suddenly charged with unspoken tension. Augustus picked up his platinum card, tucking it back into his wallet, alongside his boarding pass. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing down the familiar wave of frustration, the echo of past battles fought against assumptions and prejudice. He settled back into his seat, picked up his tablet, and tried to refocus on his keynote. But the words on the screen seemed to swim, overshadowed by the turbulence brewing right there in the gilded cage of first class. Alistair Finch returned from the galley a few minutes later, his fixed smile back in place, though perhaps tighter around the edges. Cassidy Bell hovered behind him, looking increasingly uncomfortable, like a reluctant accessory to a decision already made. Alistair stopped beside Augustus's seat once more, leaning in slightly, adopting a tone of confidential reasonableness that felt entirely false. "Sir," he began, his voice lowered, "we really must insist. It causes disruption when established procedures aren't followed. For the comfort of all our guests, we find it best when passengers are amenable to minor adjustments." He paused, letting the implication hang that Augustus, by simply occupying his assigned seat, was the source of the disruption. "We can make this quite simple, or—" He trailed off, letting the unspoken alternative linger. The veiled threat was clear. Augustus met his gaze steadily. The man's condescension was palpable, layered beneath the thin veneer of professional jargon. "Mr. Finch, the only disruption here stems from the request to vacate a seat I am rightfully occupying. The simple solution is to respect the assigned seating." Alistair's eye twitched almost imperceptibly. He wasn't getting the quick compliance he expected. He straightened up, about to speak again, when Serafina Croft made her move. Under the guise of reaching for something in the overhead bin slightly ahead of Augustus's seat, she paused beside Alistair. With practiced discretion, a subtle flick of the wrist, hidden by the angle of her body and her designer handbag, she slipped a folded wad of bills into the side pocket of Alistair's uniform jacket. The exchange was fleeting, almost invisible but not entirely unseen. The man across the aisle, pretending to adjust his reading light, angled his phone just so. The lens caught the brief transaction, the slight flush that rose on Alistair's neck as his fingers brushed against the cash. "To handle this quickly?" Alistair Serafina murmured her voice, barely above a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the cabin hum for anyone nearby. "I need my usual comfort and quiet." The bribe settled the matter in Alistair's mind. Any lingering pretense of procedure vanished, replaced by the satisfying weight in his pocket and the validation of Serafina's expectations. His posture seemed to stiffen, further emboldened. He gave Serafina a curt, almost conspiratorial nod. "Consider it handled, Ms. Croft." He turned back to Augustus, his patience now visibly exhausted. "Sir, I'm afraid your cooperation is no longer optional. We will need you to move immediately." Before Augustus could formulate a response to this blatant escalation, the cockpit door opened again. This time, Captain Alaric Shaw emerged, flanked by Alistair. The captain's face was set in a stern, no-nonsense expression. He was a man who projected authority. Crisp uniform weathered features suggesting years of command, an air of absolute control. "It's always slightly amusing," Augustus thought with a touch of dark humor, "how the most rigid adherence to flawed procedure often comes packaged in the most immaculate uniforms." Captain Shaw stopped beside the seat, his presence adding significant weight to the confrontation. He didn't address Augustus directly at first, instead listening intently as Alistair provided a rapid, hushed summary. Undoubtedly, a version of events that painted Augustus as obstinate and disruptive. Finally, the captain turned his stern gaze upon Augustus. Sir, his voice resonated with practiced command, the kind used to addressing hundreds of people over an intercom expecting immediate obedience. I am Captain Alaric Shaw, I understand, from my cabin supervisor, that you are refusing to cooperate with crew instructions regarding seating, Captain Augustus replied, keeping his voice level despite the absurdity of the situation escalating to this level. With all due respect, I am sitting in the seat assigned to me on my boarding pass. I am a Platinum member. I was asked to give up my seat for another passenger's preference, which I declined, as is my right. I have not been uncooperative. I have simply asserted my position based on the airline's own booking confirmation. Captain Shaw's expression remained unmoved. He seemed to filter Augustus's explanation through the lens of Alistair's biased report. My crew has the authority to manage seating arrangements to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers. So Mr. Finch informs me your refusal is delaying our preparation for departure and causing discomfort to Ms. Croft. The blatant misrepresentation was staggering. Augustus glanced briefly at Seraphina, who stood watching with an air of vindicated patience, and then at Alistair, whose face was a mask of smug professionalism. Captain Augustus tried again. The only delay is being caused by this insistence that I vacate my paid-for assigned seat. There is no safety issue. The discomfort seems solely related to Ms. Croft not getting the specific seat she prefers. Despite it being assigned to another paying passenger, Captain Shaw held up a hand, cutting him off. His patience, clearly thin from the outset when dealing with perceived insubordination, was gone. Sir, I am not going to debate this further. Airline regulations grant the captain final authority on all matters aboard this aircraft. You will move to another seat as directed by my crew, or I will be forced to take further action. The phrase, further action, hung in the air unambiguous. It was at this precise moment, seeing the situation spiral completely out of reason, fueled by bias entitlement, and now bribery, that Augustus knew he needed more than just his word. Quietly, deliberately, he reached for his phone on the armrest where he'd placed it earlier. He unlocked it, opened the camera app, and subtly angled it upwards to capture the faces of the 3 airline employees, now effectively cornering him. He pressed record for clarity. Captain Augustus said, his voice calm, but carrying a new edge of formality, his phone discreetly documenting the scene. Are you stating that if I do not relinquish my assigned seat 2A, which I have paid for and confirmed, you will take further action against me? Alistair saw the phone. His eyes widened in anger, and he instinctively reached forward. Recording is not permitted. He snapped his hand, coming dangerously close to Augustus's phone. Augustus drew his phone back slightly, just out of reach without breaking eye contact with the captain. Actually, Mr. Finch, there's no federal law prohibiting recording on an aircraft unless it interferes with crew duties, which this is not doing. I am merely documenting this interaction for my own protection, given the threat you've just implicitly made. His knowledge of the regulation seemed to momentarily stun Alistair into inaction. Captain Shaw's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. The lines had been irrevocably drawn. The quiet hum of the engines outside felt miles away from the charged, volatile atmosphere inside the first-class cabin of Skylux Flight 84. Captain Alaric Shaw's face hardened at Augustus's calm documentation of the threat. The captain, accustomed to his authority being unquestioned, saw the phone not as a tool for protection, but as an act of defiance. Any remaining shred of consideration evaporated. "That's enough." Captain Shaw stated his voice, sharp, final. He turned slightly and spoke into the nearest cabin intercom, his words clipped and devoid of emotion. "Gate supervisor request. Airport security. Attend Flight 84. First class cabin immediately. We have a passenger refusing crew instruction, causing a disturbance." The words echoed in the suddenly silent cabin, causing a disturbance. The phrase struck Augustus with a chilling familiarity. It was the classic catch-all justification, the label applied when authority lacked legitimate grounds, but possessed the power to enforce its will. He wasn't shouting, wasn't aggressive. He was merely sitting quietly, refusing to yield to injustice. Yet he was the disturbance. A collective intake of breath seemed to ripple through the first-class passengers. Phones that had been discreetly angled were now held more openly. The pretense of disinterest vanished. This was no longer just an awkward seating dispute. It was escalating into something far more serious. Seraphina Croft shifted her weight, a flicker of something. Perhaps unease, perhaps impatience, crossing her features before settling back into smug assurance. Alistair Finch stood rigidly beside the captain, his expression tight with vindication. Cassidy Bell looked pale, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The wait felt agonizingly long-measured in the tense silence, broken only by the ambient hum of the aircraft systems. Augustus kept his phone recording, resting it subtly on his lap, the lens capturing the scene unfolding before him. He focused on his breathing, a technique honed over years of high-stakes negotiations and unexpected crises. Control, maintain control. Don't let their prejudice dictate your reaction. But beneath the practiced calm, a cold anger churned, mixing with a deeper, older ache. The sting of being judged, dismissed, deemed unworthy based on assumptions rather than facts. It reminded him unwelcome of standing small and unheard in a principal's office, years ago, accused of something he didn't do. His quiet explanations drowned out by louder, more privileged voices. The feeling was sickeningly similar. Then came the heavy tread of footsteps on the jet bridge, growing louder as they entered the cabin. 2 uniformed airport security officers appeared, their expressions professionally neutral, but their presence instantly amplifying the tension, tenfold. They moved efficiently down the aisle, their eyes scanning the cabin until Alistair gestured pointedly toward seat 2A. The officers stopped beside Augustus. The first one, older, with tired eyes, spoke. "Sir," he began, his voice polite but firm. "We've been informed there's a situation requiring your removal from this aircraft." Augustus looked up, meeting the officer's gaze. He switched off his phone's recording, the immediate documentation having served its purpose. "Officer," he replied, his voice steady. "Could you please inform me of the specific airline policy I am violating? I am sitting in my assigned seat, 2A, with a valid boarding pass and confirmed platinum status." The security officers exchanged a brief, uncomfortable glance. This wasn't the usual scenario of an intoxicated or belligerent passenger. Augustus was calm, articulate, and seemingly within his rights. The second younger officer spoke, avoiding the direct question. "Sir, you need to gather your belongings and come with us. Now, please." Augustus didn't move immediately. He looked past the officers towards Captain Shaw, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, observing. Captain Shaw, Augustus asked directly, his voice, carrying clearly in the hushed cabin, cutting through the pretense. "Am I being removed from this flight solely because I refuse to give up my correctly assigned seat to another passenger." The captain's jaw tightened. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, the words sounding hollow, even as he spoke them. "You are being removed, sir, for failing to follow crew instructions and creating a disturbance." A low murmur went through the passengers. The man across the aisle shook his head, almost imperceptibly. The businesswoman, 2 rows ahead, closed her laptop with a quiet snap. The injustice was palpable. There was nothing more to be said. Arguing further would only serve their narrative of him being disruptive. With a quiet dignity that felt heavier than any physical burden, Augustus began to gather his belongings. He methodically closed his tablet case, slipped his keynote notes back into his slim leather briefcase, and slowly stood up. His height made the cramped space feel even more confining, the low ceiling pressing down. As he straightened, he saw Seraphina Croft, watching a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. It wasn't just about the seat anymore. He realized. For her, it was about restoring a perceived order, putting someone she deemed out of place back in their supposed station. The thought sent another wave of cold anger through him, but his face remained impassive. He turned to step into the aisle flanked by the 2 security officers. As he passed the row where Alastair Finch stood, supervising the removal, a final damning act unfolded. Thinking herself unobserved in the minor commotion, Seraphina leaned slightly towards Alastair as Augustus passed. "Thanks for handling that," she whispered, just loud enough for the man across the aisle, his phone still angled correctly to capture the audio along with the visual. She discreetly pressed another folded bill into Alastair's waiting hand. First class should maintain certain standards. The whispered words, the casual exchange of money, confirming the transactional nature of the discrimination, hung in the air like poison. It was the final insult, the crude underlining of the prejudice he had faced. Augustus walked down the aisle. Head held high back straight. He didn't look at the other passengers, didn't acknowledge their pitying or curious glances. He focused on the steady rhythm of his steps on the carpeted floor, the posture of a man who had weathered storms before and knew the importance of maintaining integrity even in the face of humiliation. Each step felt both heavy and strangely light, shedding the immediate conflict but carrying the weight of its injustice. He stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge. The door hissed shut behind him. For a moment he was alone in the brightly lit passageway connecting the aircraft to the terminal. The security officers lingered a few steps behind, giving him space. And in that sudden, sterile quiet, the control he had so carefully maintained threatened to crack. The humiliation washed over him, sharp and visceral. It wasn't just about the seat. It was the blatant dismissal, the assumption of inferiority, the casual corruption that allowed prejudice to prevail. The memory of his father, who had faced far worse indignities, with quiet strength, but undeniable pain, surfaced unwanted. The locket felt heavy beneath his shirt. He leaned a hand against the cool metal wall of the jet bridge, closing his eyes for a brief second, allowing the anger, the hurt, the sheer wrongness of it all to surge through him. He hadn't built an empire by being naive. He knew bias existed, but to experience it so crudely, so personally after everything, it ignited a fire within him, fierce and clarifying. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was unacceptable. This required more than just a complaint. This required a reckoning. He pushed himself off the wall, the brief moment of vulnerability passing replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He straightened his suit jacket, his expression settling into one of quiet determination. They had mistaken his composure for weakness, They had mistaken his civility for acquiescence. They had grounded him, removed him from their gilded cage. They had picked the wrong man to humiliate. He pulled out his phone, his fingers already moving swiftly across the screen, composing a message, not of anger, but of action. A message to Odette Moreau. It was time to deploy resources of a different kind. The cold resolve that settled over Augustus Thorne on the jet bridge was absolute. The brief flare of raw emotion had crystallized into purpose. He finished composing the text message to Odette Moreau, his chief operating officer. Concise, clear, initiating a protocol they hadn't needed in years. Skylux Flight 84. Incident discriminatory removal. Initiate red flag protocol. Stand by. He knew Odette would understand immediately. She wouldn't bombard him with questions. She would activate their legal team, their communications specialists, their crisis management unit. Within minutes, a secure virtual command center would be operational. That's how Right Tech Solutions operated. Swift, decisive, prepared. The two security officers who had escorted him watched him now with growing unease. The older one approached hesitantly. "Sir," he began, clearing his throat. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. The report mentioned disruption, but..." His voice trailed off, the flimsy justification sounding weak even to his own ears. Augustus lowered his phone, his gaze steady. "Officer, the misunderstanding was not on my part. I was seated, confirmed and cooperative, until asked to relinquish my seat due to another passenger's preference. When I declined, citing policy, I was threatened and subsequently removed. The only disruption was the airline staff's insistence on violating their own rules." The officer shifted his weight, glancing at his partner, who subtly shook his head. They were cogs in a machine, enforcing a directive they likely now realized was deeply flawed. "We apologize for the inconvenience, sir," the older officer mumbled before he and his partner made a hasty retreat back towards the terminal, clearly wanting no further part in the situation. Just as Augustus turned to head towards the Skylux customer service desk, not to complain, but to document the exact time and location of his removal, a young woman hurried towards him from the direction of the gate, pulling a carry-on bag. He recognized her instantly. The businesswoman who had been seated across the aisle, the one whose head had tilted in attention earlier. "Excuse me, Mr. Sir," she said, slightly breathless indignation flashing in her eyes on his behalf. "I saw what happened. It was outrageous. I followed you off. I couldn't just sit there." She held up her phone. "I recorded everything. From the moment that first flight attendant approached you, right until they forced you off. And I got this too." She quickly navigated her phone, showing him the screen. There it was, clear, unobstructed footage. The initial confrontation, Alistair's condescension, the captain's flawed intervention, and most damningly, the unmistakable shots of Seraphina Croft slipping money into Alistair Finch's pocket. Both before and after his removal, the whispered comments about standards were audible. This was blatant discrimination, bought and paid for. The woman continued, her voice trembling slightly with anger. "You need to have this. They shouldn't get away with it." For the first time since the ordeal began, a genuine warmth touched Augustus's expression. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "This is incredibly helpful. I appreciate you doing this." They quickly exchanged contact information, the woman promising to send the full unedited video file immediately via a secure link and readily agreeing to be a witness if needed. As she hurried away to catch her own connecting flight, Augustus watched her go, a renewed sense of purpose solidifying within him. Evidence objective, irrefutable evidence. Meanwhile, miles away on the top floor of the gleaming Skylux Tower, CEO Silas Blackwood was staring grimly at quarterly revenue projections that refused to climb. His office, usually a sanctuary of polished wood and panoramic city views, felt constricting. His phone buzzed, an urgent internal call from Janet Riley, his head of public relations. Silas Janet's voice was tight with controlled panic. "We have a potential category, 5 storm brewing, a video. It's going viral fast." Silas sighed, rubbing his temples. "Janet, passengers get upset. They film things, handle it. Standard procedure." "No, Silas, this is different. It's bad. Really bad. First class, flight 84 to Geneva this morning. Passenger removed, reason." Silas asked impatiently. "The video shows a black man sitting calmly in his seat, being pressured by the crew. Finch is in it clear as day. To give up his seat for a white woman looks like Serafina Croft, one of our regulars. He refuses shows, his platinum card stays calm. They call security, physically remove him." Janet took a breath. "And Silas, the video clearly shows Croft slipping money to Finch. Twice. It's already hashtagged Skylux discrimination, and it's exploding." The blood drained from Silas Blackwood's face. "Bribery discrimination. On video. Send it to me." Now his hands trembled slightly as he clicked the link Janet sent. He watched the scene unfold on his monitor. The entitled impatience of Serafina Croft, the condescending professionalism of Alistair Finch, the weak justifications of Captain Shaw, the quiet dignity of the man being removed, and the sickeningly clear shots of money-changing hands. It was a public relations catastrophe, a textbook example of everything they claimed Skylux wasn't. "Who is he?" Silas demanded, his voice hoarse. "Have we identified the passenger?" "Working on it," Janet replied. "Manifest lists a few possibilities in first. Checking against visuals now." There was a pause, the sound of frantic typing. Then Janet's voice returned, hesitant. "Okay. Got facial recognition confirmation against booking photos and platinum profile. Silas the passenger, in seat 2A, the one removed. His name is Augustus Thorne." Silence hung heavy in the office. Silas stared blankly at the screen, the name echoing in his mind. Augustus Thorne. "It couldn't be," Janet Silas said slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you say Augustus Thorne?" "Yes, Silas." "Why does that name mean?" Silas didn't hear the rest. He slumped back in his high-backed leather chair, the city view blurring before his eyes. Augustus Thorne, founder and CEO of Right Tech Solutions. The elusive, brilliant head of the very company Skylux had been desperately courting for a $50 million partnership to overhaul their entire obsolete tech infrastructure. The company whose revolutionary AI was supposed to eliminate bias in customer interactions. And then another colder realization hit him, something he'd read in a confidential M&A briefing weeks ago. Right Tech Solutions, through various holding companies, had been quietly, steadily acquiring Skylux stock on the open market for the past 2 years. He frantically signaled to his assistant outside his glass office door, miming for the latest shareholder report. His assistant rushed in moments later, tablet in hand. "Sir, Ms. Riley is holding. She says the video view count just passed 5 million. Major news outlets are picking it up." The assistant trailed off, sensing the frozen horror on his boss's face. "Sir, are you all right?" Silas didn't answer. He snatched the tablet, scrolling frantically through the shareholder registry, and there it was. Right Tech, holdings and associated entities, controlling interest, approximately 25%. 25% controlling stake when allied with strategic partners. The man they had just humiliated, bribed against, and forcibly ejected from their aircraft didn't just hold the key to their future technological salvation. He effectively owned the airline. The phone on Silas's desk buzzed again. Caller ID office of Augustus Thorne. The reckoning had arrived. The emergency board meeting of Skylux Airlines convened with unprecedented speed. Board members summoned from golf courses, family dinners, and other high-level engagements gathered in the main boardroom on the top floor, their faces a mixture of confusion, concern, and irritation at the abrupt interruption. The air crackled with nervous energy and whispered speculation. They knew it was serious, the viral video, the stock price plummeting, but few understood the full magnitude of the storm they were sailing into. Silas Blackwood stood at the head of the long, polished table, looking pale and older than he had just hours before. He barely registered the murmured greetings as the board members took their seats in the plush leather chairs. His focus was on the heavy oak doors at the far end of the room. When the doors finally opened, a hush fell over the room. Augustus Thorne entered, flanked by Odette Morrow, and two stern-faced individuals Silas recognized as top legal counsel from Right Tech Solutions. Augustus wore the same impeccably tailored suit he'd been wearing when forcibly removed from their aircraft hours earlier, a silent, powerful statement. He moved with a quiet confidence that commanded attention, his expression unreadable, but radiating an undeniable authority that had nothing to do with the volume of his voice. He took a seat offered near the head of the table directly opposite Silas Odette, and the lawyers sat beside him, opening laptops with swift efficiency. Silas cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. Mr. Thorne, he began, his voice strained. On behalf of the board and the entire Skylux family, I want to offer our most profound apologies for the utterly inexcusable treatment you endured. Augustus held up a hand, cutting him off, gently but firmly. Mr. Blackwood, while I acknowledge your sentiment, apologies are insufficient for what transpired today. We have business to discuss. His tone was calm, measured, but left no room for platitudes or deflection. He nodded to Odette, who seamlessly connected a laptop to the room's main display. The video began to play. Crisp, clear, damning. The entire sequence unfolded before the horrified eyes of the board. Cassidy Bell's initial, hesitant approach. Seraphina Croft's entitlement. Alistair Finch's condescension. The blatant bribe. Captain Shaw's rigid dismissal. The humiliation of the removal. And the final poisonous exchange of money and whispered words about standards. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp intake of breath from one board member and the low groan from another. Several members avoided looking directly at Augustus. The raw evidence was irrefutable, far more potent than any third-hand report. What you have just witnessed, Augustus stated, his voice resonating quietly, but carrying immense weight, is not merely a customer service failure. It is a symptom of a deeper issue within this airline's culture, a culture that allowed bias, entitlement, and corruption to dictate the treatment of a paying passenger. He paused, letting the words sink in. As you are now aware, my company, Right Tech Solutions, holds a significant stake in Skylux Airlines, approximately 25%. Combined with our strategic partners, we represent a controlling interest. Panicked glances shot around the table. Most board members had been unaware of the full extent of Right Tech's holdings. Therefore, Augustus continued, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. I am not here simply to request action. I am here to mandate it. First, immediate termination of all staff members directly involved in this incident. Flight attendant Cassidy Bell, cabin supervisor Alistair Finch, and Captain Alaric Shaw. A board member, a portly man named Henderson, sputtered, Mr. Thorne, termination seems drastic. Perhaps suspension, retraining union agreements. This is non-negotiable, Mr. Henderson Augustus replied coolly. Accountability must be swift and unequivocal. Second, the proposed $50 million technology partnership between Right Tech Solutions and Skylux Airlines is hereby withdrawn. Gasps echoed around the room. That contract was seen as the airline's primary path to modernization and competitiveness. That deal is crucial, Thorne Silas protested, his voice rising. Without it, we're years behind. And operating with a culture that allows today's events to happen makes you unfit partners for a company dedicated to ethical technology, Augustus countered calmly. My decision stands. Just as the tension reached a breaking point, the boardroom doors burst open. A young financial analyst rushed in, ignoring all protocol, his face pale with urgency. He thrust a tablet towards Silas, Mr. Blackwood. Sir, the stock, the analyst stammered. News of Mr. Thorne's identity as the passenger and his stake, it's leaked. We're down 12% in the last 20 minutes. Analysts are predicting a 30% drop by closing bell if decisive action isn't seen immediately. The tablet screen showed a terrifyingly steep downward trend line. The reality hit the board members with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just about ethics or apologies anymore. It was about survival. Dumping 25% of the stock, losing the tech contract. Skylux would be crippled, possibly bankrupt. Silas looked from the plummeting stock chart to Augustus's unwavering gaze. The choice was brutally clear. The terminations are approved. Silas announced, his voice heavy with defeat. Effective immediately, all three. He signaled to his assistant to relay the message to HR. In a sterile conference room 3 floors below, Cassidy Bell, Alistair Finch, and Captain Alaric Shaw sat in uncomfortable silence. They had been summoned by HR without explanation, though the panicked whispers spreading through the company grapevine had them deeply worried. The HR director entered, accompanied by legal counsel and 2 security guards who positioned themselves discreetly by the door. Your employment with Skylux Airlines is terminated effective immediately, the HR director stated bluntly, placing 3 identical folders on the table. Cassidy gasped, tears instantly welling. Alistair leaped to his feet, indignation contorting his features. Terminated for what? Following procedure. Captain Shaw simply closed his eyes, his weathered face seeming to age a decade in that moment. The HR director calmly turned a laptop towards them. The viral video played. They watched themselves, Cassidy's discomfort, Alistair's smugness and acceptance of the bribe, the captain's flawed judgment. The colour drained from Alistair's face as he saw the money change hands. Accepting bribes to discriminate against a passenger is not procedure. Mr. Finch, the HR director said coldly, we made a mistake. Cassidy sobbed. I knew it was wrong. I trusted my crew. Captain Shaw murmured, sounding utterly broken. The passenger you removed, the HR director, delivered the final blow, was Augustus Thorne, CEO of Right Tech Solutions, and our largest individual shareholder. The revelation hit them like a physical shockwave. They were escorted out past staring colleagues, experiencing the same walk of shame Augustus had endured hours earlier. Back in the boardroom, Augustus wasn't finished. Terminations address the individuals, he said, but not the system that enabled them. Therefore, my final mandate, Skylux Airlines will implement comprehensive mandatory bias and sensitivity training developed by Right Tech Solutions for every single employee, from baggage handlers to the board members in this room. More murmurs. The cost, the logistics. And to demonstrate the absolute seriousness of this commitment, Augustus delivered the final unprecedented blow, Skylux Airlines will implement a company-wide operational grounding, effective midnight tonight for 48 hours. All flights suspended, all services halted. Every employee will participate in the first phase of this mandatory training during this period. Audible gasps filled the room. A complete 48-hour shutdown. Unheard of. Billions in lost revenue, but the message was undeniable. This wasn't just PR. This was a pivot, a painful, expensive, necessary pivot, away from the culture that had led them to this disastrous brink. Silas Blackwood looked at Augustus Thorne, the man they had tried to dismiss, now dictating the airline's drastic, necessary penance. He nodded slowly. So be it. Downstairs, as the news began to filter through the ranks via internal memos, the reaction among general staff was less about corporate ethics and more about immediate disruption. One baggage handler, hearing the news on his break, simply grumbled to his colleague, 48 hours grounded. Great. I haven't even finished my coffee yet. The revolution had begun, not just with a bang, but with the mundane inconveniences that signal profound change. The 48-hour grounding of Skylux Airlines sent shock waves through the industry, a costly, unprecedented demonstration of commitment. But it was only the beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, the airline embarked on the most profound transformation in its history, a journey far more turbulent than any flight path. Conference rooms across Skylux hubs became mandatory training centers. The program, designed by RightTech Solutions' team of behavioral scientists and AI ethicists, was immersive, challenging, and deeply uncomfortable. It wasn't about PowerPoint platitudes. It was about confronting unconscious bias through sophisticated simulations, difficult conversations, and unflinching self-reflection. Employees, from baggage handlers still grumbling about the initial shutdown to senior executives, were pushed outside their comfort zones. Augustus Thorne made a point of attending several sessions unannounced, not as a shareholder or CEO, but simply as a participant observer, sometimes sharing brief aspects of his own experience. His presence was a potent reminder of the human cost of bias. In one session focused on microaggressions, an older mechanic, genuinely perplexed, asked, "But if I don't mean anything bad by asking someone where they're really from, how can it be offensive?" The facilitator patiently guided the group through the impact versus intent discussion. The awkward silence, punctuated by dawning comprehension on some faces and lingering defensiveness on others. It was slow, painstaking work, dismantling years of ingrained assumptions. One uncomfortable conversation at a time, progress, Augustus reminded himself, rarely travels in a straight line. Outside the airline's transforming walls, the consequences for those directly involved continued to unfold. Seraphina Croft found her world shrinking. Skylux issued a lifetime ban, but the damage spread further. Her company placed her on administrative leave, pending an ethics investigation, after the story, complete with her name and actions, became fodder for national news commentary. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with the woman dubbed Airline Angel of Entitlement on social media. For perhaps the first time, the bubble of privilege that had always insulated her showed cracks, forcing a confrontation with the real-world impact of her casual arrogance, though genuine remorse remained elusive. Alistair Finch. Cassidy Bell and Captain Alaric Shaw discovered that infamy in the digital age was a persistent shadow rejection. Emails from other airlines became routine. Alistair's indignation slowly curdled into bitter resentment as doors slammed shut. Captain Shaw, his distinguished 30-year career reduced to a single catastrophic lapse in judgment, found himself unemployable in the cockpit, Cassidy Bell, perhaps the most conflicted from the start, spiraled into deep regret, replaying the events endlessly haunted by her fear-driven compliance. It was amidst this landscape of consequence and transformation that Augustus Thorne announced a surprising new initiative through his foundation, the Second Chance Program. Designed specifically for individuals who had lost careers due to documented incidents of bias, provided they demonstrated genuine remorse and commitment to change, the program offered intensive rehabilitation counseling and potential pathways back to employment, often in different roles or industries. Accountability is essential. Augustus stated at the press conference launching the program, but accountability doesn't have to mean permanent, professional exile. We cannot build a more equitable society if we don't believe in the capacity for growth and offer pathways for earned redemption. Among the first hesitant applicants were Cassidy Bell and Alistair Finch. Captain Shaw, accepting he would never fly commercially again, declined, but found a measure of peace, volunteering his time, eventually speaking to pilot trainees about situational awareness and the critical importance of ethical decision-making under pressure, a different kind of second chance. The program was rigorous. For Alistair, it meant confronting the deep-seated biases he hadn't even recognized in himself, tracing their roots back to his upbringing, dismantling the sense of superiority he had mistaken for professionalism. It was a bruising, humbling process. I never thought of myself as prejudiced, he admitted tearfully during one group session. I thought, because I wasn't actively hateful. I was okay. This experience, losing everything, it forced me to see how subtly bias works, how it poisoned my judgment. For Cassidy, the journey focused on moral courage, on finding her voice. I knew it was wrong. She shared her voice, thick with emotion. I felt sick watching it happen. But I was scared. Scared of Alistair. Scared of losing my job. My silence made me part of it. I have to learn to speak up, even when it's terrifying. Months later, armed with certificates from the program and countless hours of difficult self-work, they began the arduous process of job hunting again. Their applications now included candid acknowledgments of their past, framed not as excuses, but as context for demonstrated growth. It wasn't easy. Many doors remained closed, but eventually Cassidy secured a position, not flying, but working for a non-profit focused on conflict resolution. It paid far less, but it felt meaningful. Alistair, after numerous rejections, found work in logistics coordination for a regional transport company. Humbled but determined to apply his hard-won self-awareness, redemption wasn't a guarantee of regaining lost status. It was about becoming better. Skylux itself continued its metamorphosis. Independent audits confirmed what passengers were reporting: tangible change. Customer satisfaction scores climbed particularly among minority travelers, who for the first time reported experiences consistently equal to or better than white passengers, a statistic that should have been standard but had been historically elusive across the industry. New hiring practices focused on diversity and inclusion, moving beyond lip service to genuine representation. Zero-tolerance policies for discrimination were embedded in the company, DNA rigorously enforced. 6 months after the incident that nearly broke the airline, Augustus Thorne sat across from Silas Blackwood in the CEO's office. Between them lay the latest progress report: improved metrics, positive employee feedback, surveys, successful policy implementations. You've shown real change, Silas Augustus acknowledged, closing the folder. The transformation wasn't perfect, wasn't complete. Genuine change never is. But the trajectory was undeniable. That deserves recognition. Silas nodded, the stress of the past months visible but tempered with a weary pride. It hasn't been easy, Augustus, or cheap, but it was necessary. What happened to you? It held up a mirror, forced us to confront things we'd ignored for far too long. That's often how meaningful change happens, Augustus replied, not through comfort, but through confrontation, through recognizing the flaws and having the courage to rebuild. He decided then, Right Tech will reopen discussions for the technology partnership, under new terms reflecting the new Skylux. A slow smile spread across Silas's face, the first genuine one Augustus had seen. Relief washed over him. Thank you, Augustus. We won't let you down. He stood extending his hand. And next time you fly with us? He added a twinkle of the planned humor, finally surfacing in his eyes. I promise. Seat 2A will be waiting. Might even rope it off with gold velvet. Just kidding. Mostly. Augustus chuckled, shaking the offered hand. They weren't quite friends. Perhaps never would be. But they were partners forged in the crucible of crisis, navigating the complex flight path towards a better, more equitable standard. As he left the Skylux Tower, Augustus felt a sense of earned peace, not just for himself, but for the potential ripple effect of the changes enacted. Justice, he reflected, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about the hard, necessary work of progress, ensuring the gilded cage was dismantled, allowing everyone the chance to truly soar. Sometimes the most profound changes aren't born from comfort, but from confrontation. Augustus Thorne's journey and the painful transformation of an entire airline reminds us that facing uncomfortable truths is often the first necessary step towards real progress. How often, perhaps, do we overlook the currents of bias running beneath the surface of our own daily lives, until something forces us to see the path to rebuilding trust, and earning redemption is rarely straightforward, is it? It demands accountability, sustained effort, and perhaps, most difficult of all, a willingness to believe in the capacity for genuine change both in ourselves and in others. This story certainly left us with a lot to think about. What resonated most deeply with you? Was it the courage to stand firm against injustice? The difficult process of corporate change, or the complex nature of second chances? Share your reflections in the comments below. We truly value hearing your perspective. If this journey touched you, please give this video a like. And if you believe stories like these can spark important conversations, consider sharing it with someone who might appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you won't miss out on more stories that explore the depths of human experience with us. Thank you for joining us on this journey today. Until next time, take care.